Thank you, Brigitte and Glenn. Wonderful, always inspirational. Thank you. Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. This is the Rotary Club of Toronto. I'm John Fortney, Club President. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our very special Women's International Day Rotary meeting. After the invocation and the recognition of traditional lands, please stay tuned for the playing of the national anthem and the loyal toast. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of many Indigenous people who have walked and cared for this land for 15,000 years. They include the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the treaty peoples of the Mississaugas of the Credit. On this day, we honor women. Speak and you will be heard. Make your words kind and you will be judged so. Give freely to all, and you shall receive so much more. Listen to the troubles of others, and know your own shall be diminished. Dream of what you can be, and a world of peace, beauty, plenty will be there for all to share. We give thanks for this opportunity to come together to honor women all over the world. And now our national anthem, and if you'd like to, please stand for the national anthem, followed by the toast.
Okay. Oh, Canada, oh, home and native land, true patriot love in all of our command. We know with hopes we see thee rise, the Toronto strong and free, from far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God gave a land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Queen. Oh, sorry. Please be seated. Thank you, Brigitte and Glenn again. Rotarians and guests, it is now my pleasure to introduce our head table. I am pleased to have the following people with me today. Deb Snyder, a Rotarian since 2018, classification, business development, and project management. Deb is the chair of our Marketing and Communications Committee and our Women's Initiatives Committee. Michelle Guy, a Rotarian since 1991, classification, law, practice, general. She is a lawyer and a partner with Coots Crane. Michelle is a past president for the year 2001-2002 and was the first female president of our club. Pauline Lyons, Rotarian since 2018, classification, senior home care. She is vice president of Living Assistance Services, a member of our Women's Initiative Committee, and a host to our guest speakers, who are Emilie Coyle, our keynote speaker, and Rashida Samji, our special guest speaker. Both will be more formally introduced shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, our head table. To our visiting Rotarians and guests, thank you for choosing our club for your makeup, and we hope that you enjoy the meeting. To all of our guests, welcome to our virtual meeting today, and please feel free to contact the office and find out how you may be able to make a difference by joining us. Everyone, please welcome our guests. For announcements, I don't have many. First, as you know, may already know, in case you do not, you should be aware that these virtual Rotary meetings, that if you have your video camera on, that you may show up in the YouTube or the Google Meet recordings or live streaming. If you do not want to appear, please turn off your video. We will not be able to edit you out later. Thank you. Shelterbox. Our Rotary International partner is holding an International Women's Day virtual panel discussion on Monday, May the 8th at 3 p.m. The discussion topic is choose to challenge women as change makers. If anyone is interested in receiving the link, please register an email with Carol at the office. Now it is time for our guest speaker introductions, and I would like to pass things over to Pauline Lyons. Over to you, Pauline.
Good afternoon, President John. The Rotary Club of Toronto Women's Initiative Committee would like to welcome Rotarians and guests to a celebration of International Women's Day. International Women's Day is promoted globally each year on March 8th as a celebration of social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. This date marks one of the most important days of the year to celebrate women's achievements, raise awareness about women's equality. The theme for this year is Choose to Challenge. We encourage you to raise your hand if you choose to challenge and call out gender bias and inequality. Raise your hand if you choose to seek out and celebrate women's achievements. There are so many women whose accomplishments we proudly recognize. Here are just a few of them on this video. Thank you. Now it is my honor to introduce today's speakers. But before I do, I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the members of the Women's Initiative Committee. Salim Kassam, Peter Simi, Jane Fitzgerald, June Brown, Mitra Godarzi, Sarah Huey, Marg Stanowski, and a special thanks to our chair, Debbie Snyder, for her direction and support of our committee. We would also like to thank Drew Snyder, son of Debbie Snyder, who produced this powerful video. A lot of work and time went into this, and we appreciate his contribution. Now let me introduce you to our speakers. Emilie Coyle is the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. She previously worked as the Director of the Refugee Sponsorship Support Program at the University of Ottawa. Emilie has practiced family, criminal, and immigration law. In addition to her professional accomplishments as a bilingual legal professional and not-for-profit advocate, Emilie was a co-founder of Parents for Diversity, a citizens group working with parents and teachers to address discrimination with the goal of making schools safer for all children and youth, and a proud sponsor of LGBTQ refugees for many years. She lives with her partner, Adam, and her children, Maya and Nico, and loves a good book recommendation. Rashida Samji aced her Aga Khan High School with straight A's. In years to follow, she rose to upper echelons of Canadian society as a highly regarded legal professional. Faced with the battle of her life, she looked cancer in the eye and beat it. Not once, but 2 times. Often seen as a speaker for charity events, she lived in the city of her dreams. Life could not beat her. Then the winds of change finally brought Miss Samji to her knees. A series of poor choices, misfortunate alliances, incarcerated Rashida in a federal prison. Losing her career, her reputation, and even her family alliances, she pivoted her focus and started making different choices. She is today rebuilding herself as a peer advocate for LGBTQ and Indigenous cultures and advocates for incarcerated women. She's determined to make a positive difference. Now let's listen. Over to you, Emilie.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and thank you to the Women's Initiative Committee, and thank you to President John, especially to Debbie, who reached out to us, having heard my colleagues speak on the issue that I'll be speaking with you about today. It really is an honor. Women's Day, International Women's Day on March the 8th is an opportunity for us to celebrate all of those wonderful people that were on the video that your son made, Deb, how wonderful it was. And everybody who is here, all the women who are attending today and around the world. One of the things that really struck me was the picture of Viola Desmond's sister holding the $10 bill. And Viola Desmond herself is someone that we at the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, if she were alive today, we would have worked with her because she did spend time in prison. And, you know, we look at the rest of the people on that video, Sheila Watt-Cloutier, who is an amazing voice for the North, an Indigenous woman, almost half of the women that we work with in the federal prisons designated for women are Indigenous. And so something for us to think about as we talk through the presentation today. And so before Prince puts up my slides, which he's kindly going to go through for me, I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be talking about the work of the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. But really what we're doing is we're talking about a solution to a very complex issue. In fact, it's many complex problems that are layered on top of each other, which lead us to do the work that we do at the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. And then once I'm done my presentation, you'll have the opportunity to hear from a wonderful woman named Rashida, who will tell you what it was like to spend time in a prison, which is the solution that we have currently, which is not working. And that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about as well. And then I'll be posing some questions at the end of my presentation for people to think about, and hopefully we can be creative in our solutions to these complex issues that we'll bring up. So if we could bring up the slides now. And thank you for your time and thank you for being here. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to be speaking with you about the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, and I'm currently the executive director there. And we work with women and gender diverse people who are criminalized. And you'll see here overlapping Venn diagrams. So we have the CAEFS national office where I work and the board of directors, obviously. We also have regional advocates, we have regional councils, and we have our membership. And I'm going to go into each of these circles in a little bit more detail. So on the next slide, we have our membership. And this is a beautiful picture of many of our executive directors from across the country. We have 24 member societies who are located from British Columbia all the way across to Newfoundland. They are independently operated and governed entities, and they all have different mandates, but we have a shared commitment of working with in criminalized women, girls, and gender diverse people in order to solve some of the issues that I'm going to be talking about in a moment. On the next slide, you'll see the impact that our membership has had. So last year, 90,000 clients were served across the country in a variety of programs and services, which include counseling programs, housing programs, employment programs, legal supports. We have 700 staff across the country, 50,000 hours of volunteer time. Some of you may have been in touch with the Elizabeth Fry Society of Toronto in your neck of the woods. And the oldest Elizabeth Fry Society is 83 years old this year. On the next slide, we have regional councils. So, for example, in Ontario, we have the Council of Elizabeth Fry Societies in Ontario. There are quite a few Elizabeth Fry Societies in Ontario, so they have banded together to look at region-specific issues that they deal with. And you can see this wonderful sign that one of our staff is holding up. When I dream of a world without prisons, I imagine a world of abundance and opportunity for all, where all people care for each other, and where punishment and blame are replaced by compassion and understanding. And that's just a little preamble to what is going to come in the rest of the presentation. So moving on, we have regional advocates. And this is a really important part of the work that we do. So there are 5 federal prisons designated for women across the country. And one of them, and then we also have a healing lodge, and then there are also 2 other regional psychiatric centers. We go into all of them. We have regional advocacy teams across the country, 5 of them. As you see here, 1 in the Atlantic, 1 in Quebec, 1 in Ontario, 1 in the Prairies, and 1 in the Pacific. And these are, there are 25 advocates who belong to these 5 teams currently, although we are going to be adding to them shortly. And they go into the prisons designated for women in the psychiatric facilities, and they monitor the conditions of confinement. And really, this is beneficial for everyone, because in order to ensure that people are being treated with the human rights that they deserve, we have to be able to have eyes on what's happening in the prisons. Now, the prisons are currently a solution that we have to the complex issues that I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation. And Deb, I think, sent out a really nice flyer to tell everyone a little bit about who we work with in the prisons designated for women. And invariably, the people that we work with are people who've experienced poverty in their lives, extreme poverty. There are people who've experienced trauma. Sometimes that trauma is linked to colonialism and the practice of the residential school system. We also have people that we work with who are in the prisons who are mothers. Many of them have children on the outside. And so the ripple effects of having a mother in children and what happens to their, having a mother in prison and what happens to their children once they go to prison is something that we are very concerned about. But by and large, what we really see is a society that houses our social issues in prisons. So we take people who are in the embodiment of the social issues that I've just brought up, and because of the issues that they've experienced in their lives, often are over-surveilled by the police and often come in contact with the law in ways that they wouldn't need to be if we had other solutions. And so if I go to the next slide, you'll see the pillars of the work that we do. And so these are our solutions to those complex issues. Poverty is not an easily solved problem. Trauma is not an easily solved problem. Addiction is not an easily solved problem. But we're working on it through these three pillars. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see building capacity. What we do at the head office of the Elizabeth Fry Societies is we build the capacity of our membership, those 24 member societies that I talked to you about earlier. We build the capacity of the sector, so all of the people who are working with criminalized people, and we build the capacity of the women and gender diverse people that we work with. And we do this through connecting people, we do this through collaborating, we do this through developing a number of funds. We gather resources to help people to understand what they can do to help themselves. We do trainings, and we develop projects, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about later. And so on the next slide, you'll see the projects are currently that we're working on. One is called Breaking the Cycle. And so what we're doing is gathering all of the information about programs that are available to people who are criminalized. And where we see gaps, we're helping to bring people together to fill in those gaps. We're also working on the National Research Project looking at housing, which is another very complex issue. The lack of affordable housing for people can lead people to do to make some interesting choices in their lives in order to find housing. And so we're looking at the response that our local Elizabeth Fry societies have provided during the COVID-19 pandemic to provide affordable housing or responsive housing to folks who are leaving prisons. We also have bursaries that we provide to people who are in prison or who have come out of prison and are looking to start their lives anew, build businesses, go to school. And we also have scholarships to the various events that we put on. And you can see here one of my board members, she has a sign up saying, "I give because women matter and they don't belong in cages." On to the next slide, please. We defend prisoner rights. And I talked to you a little bit about this with our regional advocacy teams. So this is our former executive director, Cassandra Churcher, on the top right. And she is speaking to the Senate about the work that we were doing. So when we defend prisoners' rights in the prisons, we look at individual advocacy, we meet with the wardens and the senior management in the prisons, we talk about institutional advocacy, what we can do better. And then finally, I take everything that I've learned from all of the people that we work with in the prisons, and I look to make change systemically by looking at legislative reform, speaking with our government about what can be done to ensure that we don't put people in prison and that we eventually shrink prisons out of existence because we don't need them anymore. On to the next slide, please. So we also raise awareness, and in order to do this, we have campaigns, we have our annual conference, we put out news releases and open letters. Over the last year, we've done that a lot because of COVID-19. We make presentations such as this one. We have newsletters that go into the prisons and newsletters that we share to the public. We have our annual reports, and we also have a learning exchange within our network. On to the next one. So this is a really great quote that is made by Dr. Angela Davis, who is one of the matriarchs of the prison abolition movement. And she says, "The majority of people who are in prison are there because society has failed them." And we also believe that to be true, which is where I think the solutions come in and where I think all of you come in, everybody comes in, because in order to rethink how we are organizing our society, we need everyone on board. We really do. And so when I think about prisons, and you're going to hear from Rashida about her experience in prison. But before you hear from her, I sort of want to, give some context to that. And I think about that saying, which is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. Well, we continue to put people in prison. Prisons are about 200 years old. They're not something that has always existed in our society, and they're not something that always will exist in our society. And the reason I say that is because we believe that putting people in prison makes our societies safer. We're thinking about public safety. But in fact, we know from many, many years of study that it doesn't do that. In fact, it does the opposite of that. It doesn't keep people safe. So what does keep people safe? How can we figure out ways to change the way that we do things in order to keep people safer, and especially the women that we serve and the gender diverse folks that we serve? Their vulnerabilities are unique, and we have a one size fits all that should not fit everyone. So I can tell you that I spent many hours on phones right now because of COVID. We don't go into the prisons. People call us all the time to ask us for our support. And the other day, I was speaking to a young woman who this is her first time in prison. She's terrified. She's in her early 20s, and she's there because she needed some money, and she ended up trafficking some drugs in order to pay for her rent, which is why I think about housing as a major issue that we need to tackle. So she ended up in prison. And in prison, it's a very scary place. It's a very scary place for everyone. And there is no rehabilitation happening in that environment because prison itself is a traumatic environment. So we put people who have come from trauma into trauma, and we expect them to come out of that trauma rehabilitated and ready to rejoin our society. And that's where I present to you this dilemma. So what are we going to do about it? So if we move to the final slide, I have some questions. So for me, when I say prison abolition, people sometimes get a little bit afraid. But really what I'm saying is we're trying to shrink prisons out of existence, and we're going to create instead a presence in our communities that we will replace prisons with. And so how can we ensure, these are questions that I have for everyone here, how can we ensure everyone has what they need? How can we center the healing of those who have been harmed? How can we stop harm from happening and work to ensure that it doesn't happen again? And finally, what happens if we believed that no one in our society was disposable? I'm going to leave you with those questions up for a little bit longer, just for everyone to think about that, because we end up seeing the people in prisons are the people who often are forgotten by our society, who haven't found all of the services and supports that they need in their lives. And they end up being criminalized as a result. So how can we prevent people from going to prison in the first place? How can we prevent that harm from happening? And what happens if we believe that no one was disposable? So I'm going to end my presentation there. Over to you, Rashida, to tell us about your time in the prison.
Thank you very much, Emilie, and thank you very much for the Rotary Club of Toronto for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I'm just going to share a little bit about my journey through the prison system. First of all, from the minute you are handcuffed and shackled and put into the sheriff's van to be taken to the prison, you become the other, the subhuman, because that's how you're treated all along. And that leaves scars, the physical scars of the shackles and the handcuffs. Yes, they heal over time. But the emotional scars, how do you heal those scars? Because they are very, very deep. So the first couple of weeks that I was in the Fraser Valley Institution for Women, I was totally lost, in a total state of disarray, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and I was really, really lost because you don't get a lot of support when you get there. Having said that, after a couple of weeks of being there and observing the system, I decided I had two choices. Either I was going to sink in the system and become a victim of the system, or I was going to use this opportunity to learn, to understand, and to educate myself. And I chose the avenue of learning and educating myself, which I am so thankful for today that I had the opportunity to do, because I got into peer advocacy, and I also learned about the LGBTQ culture and the Indigenous culture, none of which I had any inclination to do when I was on the outside. Having said that, this gave me the opportunity to observe some of the things that go on within the prison. The prison system, as it stands, is punitive. It's not rehabilitative. And every person who goes in there, whether it's for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 25 years, eventually has to come out. And they're not equipped, they're not prepared when they come out, because they're not given that support that they need to be able to have a life where they can integrate into normal society. And remember one thing, once you've been incarcerated, you wear that badge for the rest of your life. And everywhere you go, that is how you're looked upon, whether it is by society in general, your own community, your friends, or your family. I've been blessed with a very small circle of close family and friends who have supported me through my journey. But what I saw when I was inside was so many of these women who had absolutely no family support, no other support, nothing to look forward to. And then when they're released into the community, they're not equipped, they have no opportunity. When they come out, housing is a problem, jobs are a problem, because as I said, you're always wearing that badge. You come from a criminal place, and you're not encouraged or equipped to deal with life or to integrate back into society. So I have been looking at some of the Nordic systems where the crime rate is very low, and the prisons are what Emilie talked about, almost abolished. And how they deal with this kind of stuff, where people are not put into a prison, but are left in the community to work. Yes, they're monitored. Yes, and I do not for one moment want to say that I condone criminal activity or behavior. So please do understand that. What I'm trying to say is, how can we help people who have done harm, or how can we get them to heal and to become better citizens of society as a whole? And in that respect, I really feel that the prison system that we have currently is, as I said, it is punitive. It is not rehabilitative. And people feel you're always walking around in fear, because you're always worried that somebody is going to either punish you, or that you've done something that has upset some of the staff or somebody around you, and that you're going to be punished more. So you're always in that mode of being punished all the time. And what I found out when I was doing the peer advocacy is the treatment that some of the women got from the staff, from the institution, from everything in the system, was how unjust and how unfair it can be. Because you are an inmate, because you are in the prison, you are always wrong. Whether you're inside or outside, that is how you're looked upon. You are the person who's done wrong. So how does one come back into society and become a valuable citizen? My mission is to be a person who, this is my redemption. This is my redemption, is to be able to contribute and to advocate for incarcerated women, for women in the Indigenous community, and for the LGBT community. I would really like to be able to say that if I am able to contribute and do something for this particular section of the society, then there is a chance. As I said, the emotional scars never leave you. Physical scars, you can put vitamin E cream on and they heal, but the emotional scars, they don't heal. So one way to try and do this healing for people who come out or who are inside is to help with programs, to put more funding into the system, to pay for stuff that is rehabilitative, for addictions, for any other sort of criminal behavior. Because even when it comes to addictions, people, these women who come in and out, it becomes a revolving door, because they come out of the prison and they go right back in. I have a little example that I would like to share here. Is the house that I was in when I was in medium security. One young lady came in one day and she was, brought in, and she was, of course, lost. And I know what it's like to be lost in there. So I tried to help her find her way around, to go to healthcare, etc. And she started talking to me and she said, whatever it is, I'm so happy to be here because I get to have a warm shower, I get food, and I get a bed, because on the outside, I'm homeless. I have nowhere to go. So a lot of times with this kind of situation, it is easier for women, to be inside than it is to be outside, because they have no supports outside, they have no jobs, they have no housing. So it is easier for them to be inside the prison, which is why we find the rate of reoffending being so high, because it is easier for a lot of people to be inside than it is to be outside. So in advocacy for this kind of population, I think that what we need in the system is to have more programs, more rehabilitative programs, to invest more in this kind of thing where there is no desire to reoffend or no need to reoffend, because the person has now been rehabilitated, rather than being constantly in an environment that is punitive and always being, giving you that label of being this quote unquote bad person in society. Because let's face it, we are all human beings. Nobody is perfect. We all make mistakes. Some of us make mistakes that we pay a heavy price for, and some of us have. But at the end of the day, we are all people who would like to be good people in society, contribute to our society, to our country. And I think the focus should be, how do we get to that point? How do we achieve that? And what do we do to accomplish that? I would like at this point to say that the prison system, as I said, I was one of the more fortunate ones where I did not experience solitary confinement or the maximum security. But having done some of the volunteer work with CAEFS, I have been able to learn a lot more about those areas of the prison system. And trust me, they are very, very difficult to go through. Dry cells, SIUs, these are places in society, in the prison system, that are very, very traumatic. And with whatever little I have to share, even when I first came out after spending just 1 year in FBI, my first week, I was afraid to cross the road. I was literally afraid to cross the road because you're so enclosed in that environment, and it is so structured, and it is so difficult to be, there's no freedom at all in any way, shape, or form. And when you first come out, you feel like, oh my God, I can't cope with this. So it takes a lot of work and a lot of, I have been, as I said, I've been blessed to have a very small supportive circle. And I'm also very fortunate to be able to do some work with the Elizabeth Fry Society, because that has helped me to learn a lot of things. And I am quite determined to put that into practice. And as I said, it is my redemption, hopefully, to be able to do something of value to my community, to the society in general, and to Canada as my country. With this, I give back to you, President John. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wow, that's all I can say. Rashida, I just have to say, you are so brave and just wonderful, and speaking out on many topics is never easy. This is one that is absolutely difficult, and you speaking out really, really not only brings a light on a situation, I think it will change minds. So thank you for the bravery and to come out and speak to a group of people in public about a very personal journey, but so important. We do have some questions. I do have to say I'm probably the only member of our club that actually has been in a women's federal prison. My mother, when we lived in Kingston when I was a kid, worked at the federal penitentiary in Kingston, which at the time was the only federal prison for women. All women in Canada were put in this one building built in the 1800s. And I can tell you from being inside, we're not expecting this to be 4 seasons, but this was particularly, I can attest to how just really horrible it was. And just as a physical building. And it seems that all our topics lately have had the same theme, whether it's today's topic, diversity, LGBTQ, all these issues is we have to work on. Young marginalized communities, we need education, we need housing, we need to focus on, before people get to this stage, and divert so many people from even having to be charged or whatever. I mean, that's a very big start. And we're seeing this coming up in everything that we're dealing with at Rotary. And I think it's a loud and clear message that we have to start there. One of the questions was, what sort of alternatives would federal or provincial come up with rather than incarceration? Emilie?
Thank you. So I think I spoke a little bit about the alternatives, and we have to be creative in our thinking because it's not replacing the prison system with something exactly like it, because we will continue to have the same issues over and over again. So we need to focus on, what many people understand as the upstream, right? How do we address all of the societal and social issues that create these situations where people become criminalized? And to be quite frank, those issues are huge. I mean, I said it at the beginning, they are a lack of affordable housing. They are They are mental illness and the lack of mental illness supports and medical support really for folks with mental illness. We see so many people with mental illness disability in the prison system. So many. Because we end up criminalizing the behaviors of people who are just sick and who don't have the supports to make them well again. And I'm sure many of us on this call have, experience with mental illness. It's not something that is hidden anymore, right? I mean, in my own family, we have, a lot of mental illness that we deal with. And of course, we're very well resourced and we support each other. But for the people who are not very well resourced, for the people who don't have the supports, how are we as a society going to provide those supports so that we prevent them from becoming criminalized? We also look at communities that are already over-surveilled. So if you want to look at a community that is an alternative to prisons, look at a well-off community. Look at a suburb of Ottawa. Look at a suburb of Toronto. Where I live right now, there's no police presence. Why? Why is there no police presence where I live? Because we have so many resources. Everyone is able to get, the kind of mental health supports that they need. Everybody has housing, everybody has schooling, everybody has employment. So if we could go back to the questions that I asked at the end, how do we create a society where everybody has what they need? How can we create a society where we prevent harm from happening? How can we create a society where nobody is disposable? We have drinking water. We have clean drinking water that comes out of our taps every day. We take that for granted. On Reserve up north, many people are still under boil water advisories. I mean, they're big problems, but they're not insurmountable if we all work on them and we consider them issues that we can solve. Rashida, do you have anything you wanted to ask or answer on that point?
I think on what you just talked about, Emilie, there is definitely, there are solutions to what you discussed, and they're not surmountable. But as you and I have talked about previously, the work that is involved is quite, there's a lot of work involved. This is not something we can do in a day or 2 days, but every little bit that we do every day takes us towards a solution. And the alternatives, one of the alternatives that I have come across in my studies of the Nordic system, as far as, their system is concerned, is when a person has committed a crime and it is something that is not, not somebody who has been a serial killer or extremely violent or something like that. That person is monitored with a bracelet, an ankle bracelet, put in the community, and they can work and they can function like every other normal person in the community. And that's how they're monitored, and that's how they live their life. In doing so, although they're monitored and they have to report, but in doing so, people learn to live again in society as normal people. Whereas from the prison system, this is what I'm trying to put across, is you cannot expect a person to come out of a federal or provincial prison system and expect them to function as normal citizens in the society, having spent the kind of time and the kind of circumstances and situation that they have had to deal with inside the system.
Can I say one more thing? Do you mind if I jump in? So one of the things that we do a lot of, Rashida, do you mind just muting yourself for 1 minute? I can hear some feedback. Sorry.
I'm trying to mute myself here.
Okay. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time on at the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies is being reactive. We react a lot to what's happening in the prisons, to the human rights abuses in the prisons, and I spend a lot of my time doing that. It would be better. I would be better served if I spent a ton of time working on the in-community solutions and what's happening in the community and how we can really resource the community. And so, with most of my time being spent focused on the prisons, because really there's so much that happens all the time. Human rights abuses in the prisons happen every day. We get calls about them. And so I can't stop doing that work because I have to ensure that the people who are in prison are kept safe. And at the same time, what I want to be doing is spending all of my time working on the in-community upstream solutions. And so, I've been grappling with that problem, which is an internal CAEFS, Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Society's problem. And, looking at a feminist model of leadership on International Women's Day is something that we can think about, and shared leadership, and how I can bring someone on to the organization who is at the same level as me, who can make the same decisions as me in a leadership role, but whose focus is on the upstream. And that's one of the ways that I'm trying to really branch out the work that we're doing to ensure that we're bringing all of the rich data from the community back to the legislative tables, and back to the government. So that's another piece of the answer there. Back to you, President John.
I got a couple of questions here. One, I know some people are asking about Indigenous and why the greater numbers, and I think you've sort of already covered that. I mean, there's so much more we could do before people even get close to prison. But taking from that question, I think there's some Indigenous practices that are starting to use in prisons, and I think we could look at the Indigenous culture to learn so much, longhouses and sweat lodges, and I think there's a lot coming from other cultures, especially our own, like Indigenous, that we could do better. Rashida, what do you think? Emilie, you want to jump in for a sec?
Okay, I'll jump in while you're looking for your mute button. So yes and no. I'm going to answer that saying yes and no, because we are learning a lot about restorative justice practices, and then taking that even further. A lot of people who are looking at restorative justice, which is a practice that is used in many Indigenous cultures around when harm has happened, wrapping everyone up who is part of that harm, including the person who is the victim or the survivor of the crime or the harm, and the person who perpetrated the harm, which, by the way, can be the same person over and over again, right? Like, many of the people that we've seen in prison have been survivors and are survivors of extreme harm in their lives. Many of the people that we work with have had, histories of traumatic sexual abuse. Oh, you're back, Rashida. So, but what I worry about is if we take those practices into an existing traumatic practice like the prison, and we try to co-opt it into this already traumatic place, it's not going to have the right effect, the right outcome. And so my recommendation when I hear questions like that is 100% we need to learn about how we can do things differently, and particularly the wisdom that comes from the many Indigenous communities across Canada. But we have to do that outside of the prison. We have to make sure that it's happening in community and is being led by the folks who really get it and for whom a difference is going to be made. The prison system is not set up to do that. It's, as Rashida said, it's all punitive. It's about punishment. So I'll turn it over to you. I see you've got your button unmuted, Rashida.
Thank you, and my apologies. I'm a little technologically challenged. Actually, when I was at FBI, I did attend a sweat ceremony. And because I was really keen and interested in learning about the Indigenous culture, I got permission, because this was being done by a group of Indigenous women, and they allowed me to attend this. And it was, this heat ceremony, this sweat ceremony. And as Emilie says, there is so much wisdom in the Indigenous culture, and there is so much to learn. And there is so much spirituality in that culture. I was quite overwhelmed and taken aback when I went through this experience. And then for the next 7 days, we had to wear this skirt with the ribbons, and which one of the inmates very kindly gave me to wear and follow certain things for the next 7 days. That was one thing that I attended. And one of the other functions they had in the prison was the powwow day. And again, it was just mind-blowing how much there was to learn, how much there is to gain from that culture, how much we can get from that culture if we make the effort. And this is where I found that my journey in the Fraser Valley Institution gave me that opportunity, or gave me that curiosity to learn. And it is one of the things I'm most grateful for, because there is a lot in the Indigenous culture. There is so much in the LGBTQ culture that we need to learn about, that we need to... We are very judgmental as human beings, because anything that is outside the box, we are going to judge, because that's not what we want, or that's not what we're used to. But this is one thing that I'm very, very grateful about my journey in FVI, was it gave me that opportunity to, or the curiosity to learn about all these things. And I'm grateful for that particular aspect of my journey. Over to you, President John.
Excellent. Thank you. Beautiful responses, both. I have a two-pronged question here. One sort of written on the chat. I'm going to expand it. So for Emilie, my question is, who was Elizabeth Fry? And for Rashida, how did you come about calling Elizabeth Fry, or how did you hear about it?
Okay, so Elizabeth Fry was a Quaker woman who lived in England in the 1800s, and she worked with women and children who were in the prisons in England. And she was a reformist. So she believed that the work that she could do to reform the prison system to make it even a little bit better for the women and children that she worked with, then that was her calling as a Quaker person. As we have evolved in our understanding of the prison systems, and I think a lot about what Rashida has just said in her answer, and I'm wistful. I'm imagining a place and a world where we can have enough in community that we don't have to have people finding a bed in a prison. Like, why do they have to go to prison to have a bed? Why do they have to go to prison to have food? And the Elizabeth Fry societies across the country have food banks. They provide grocery vouchers. They even have clothing at the different times of the year for people who are in community. And it's these kinds of programs and solutions that I think need to have the same investment as the $5 billion investment that we have in the prison system. I mean, it costs us $200,000 a year to put someone in prison. Why are we spending that much money when we could be investing all of that money into the community to ensure that somebody doesn't have to go to the prison to find a bed, so that somebody just has a bed and then they can go to work and then they can come home and have their bed again? And so Elizabeth Fry was a Quaker woman who thought she could do reform. And over the years, the Elizabeth Fry societies have evolved to understand that we can't tinker around the edges of a broken system. We can't reform it. We can't make it better. We have to tear that system down and replace it with investments that really get at the root of the societal issues that we're dealing with. So that's my soapbox moment. I'll pass it over to you, Rashida. When did you first become involved with EFRI?
My first exposure to EFRI actually was from FVI, because I did the training for peer advocacy, and the EFRI ladies from the National used to visit the prison system, and I used to meet with them, and we used to talk about what the situations or the issues within the prison system were or are. And so that was my very first exposure to Elizabeth Fry. And I started to form a rapport with the ladies there. And so when I got out on day parole, and when I was in the halfway house, I contacted Fry again because I wanted to continue the work that I was doing inside, but try and do something on the outside. And I also found that that was one support system for me personally, to be able to share my own experiences, because as I have said, coming out is just as traumatic or difficult as being in there, because you are not prepared and you come out. It's a shock to your system to go in, it's a shock to your system to come out. So Elizabeth Fry was one of my support networks, and I started, to communicate with them regularly, and finally, eventually, I got in touch with Emilie and the ladies there, and I've been trying to do whatever little I can to contribute in my own way. And I'm very grateful to them for all the support that they have given me. Back to you, President John. Thank you.
Thank you. Incredible journey, as I've said before. Emilie, what do you think is the provincial and federal government's resistance? Is there a movement other than Elizabeth Fry that people are looking at doing this? What can we do? Because I can't imagine the governments would want to do anything unless there's pressure to do something.
Yeah, I would say we're at a really critical and exciting moment in Western culture in Canada and in the United States, where, we are learning so much every day about the ways that we can be in community with one another differently. And I think that when it comes to prisons, it's a difficult political topic to bring up. Most people are not elected based on their prison platform. But so that's why I don't want to talk about prisons. What I want to talk about is community and how we're building robust, responsive communities. Because if we all have what we need in community, we're going to be shrinking prisons out of existence. And that, I think, is something that we can push very hard for, all of us together. I'm certain that there are people on this call who are already doing that in the work that you do through the Rotary clubs. And certainly the folks that I met with the Women's Initiative Committee, some of them are already involved in this kind of social change. And I think social change is really what's needed. And that's how we can start to push governments to invest in communities at the same rate that we invest in an antiquated prison system.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I think you've opened some eyes here, and there'll be more. I think people on this call will be more inclined than they already were to be on this. And as I tied it in earlier, the work that we are doing, the base work of education, equality, housing, clean water, sanitation, all these things that we're working on will also aid in your what you're striving for. I'd like to thank you, Emilie and Rashida. A donation has been made in your honor to Sistering. It's a multi-service agency that offers practical and emotional resources to women who experience homelessness or precarious housing, trauma and violence, social isolation, discrimination, substance use, or need for mental health support. Women who come to Sistering find ways to heal, build communities of trust, and make changes to their lives in a safe, welcoming, and non-judgmental space, committed to ensuring all women, regardless of circumstances, are respected and valued. This donation is made in partnership with the Senior Citizens and Women's Initiatives Committees of the Rotary Club of Toronto. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's very wonderful and actually falls really neatly within all of the topics that we discussed today. So that's really very kind. And I thank you all for having us today. It's been wonderful.
Our pleasure. And ladies of the initiative, Women's Initiative Committee, thank you also for an amazing topic and an amazing program today. Thank you. To think that there was a world with no women in Rotary, it's hard to believe in 2021 that it was ruled, and just the difference that women have made in Rotary. We talk about Mother Earth, Mother Nature, our own mothers, just an integral part of life, and how women could not be at the table is just reprehensible and just unimaginable. And I know our little club, the most unbelievable women that are members of our club, and what they do and have done is monumental. And I thank all the women who have stepped up to join Rotary. And I don't know if this is going to sound weird, but I thank the men for welcoming them in and appreciating the value of women. So I just want to applaud all the women of our club. Thank you so much for all that you do. Next Friday, March the 12th, is our Charitable Foundation Day meeting, and our guest will be Rick Goldsmith, the president of the Rotary Club of Toronto Charitable Foundation. Please feel free to invite guests and share the links to connect. However, have them connect with the office in order to be admitted to the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for joining our meeting today. The meeting is adjourned. Have a wonderful, wonderful sunny weekend.